Howdy gamers! I just finished Final Fantasy II, and after posting my video on Final Fantasy I, I had a lot of people commenting various degrees of skip this next game cause it sucks. I had suggestions to jump to 3, 4, 5, 6, practically every other Pixel game except playing 2. And while I appreciated those suggestions, I am determined to beat every mainline game, and Final Fantasy II is no exception. 14 and 11 might be, but we'll do that when we get there. But well, now that I've beat Final Fantasy II, this game is obviously amazing! An incredible, in-depth story. I remember the names of nearly 5 characters. And, I mean, you go to hell. Like, come on. You know that pesky EXP system from the first game? You know, the logical system that makes every random encounter feel worth something? Yeah, I hated it too. I prefer a 1 to 16 leveling system that only increases if you hit a certain amount of attacks in a battle. Incredible. And magic? Well, that shit's stupid. I hated how useful and high damage it was in Final Fantasy I. I much prefer the system where it's just the entire time worse than simply choosing to hit with stick. And you know what? That's just better. I love hit with stick. You know what else totally sucked from the first game that they fixed? Having 4 useful characters you carry throughout the game. I love that they want to replace the 4th character with a guest that is constantly weaker than everyone I have. Honestly, don't know how this isn't considered the best game in the series. I hope they keep these amazing changes going forward, especially the keyword system. Okay, well, I may have given the game up with a slight hint of sarcasm that you may have picked up on. But, I can honestly say, with complete confidence, this game is not good. And I was incredibly disappointed after Final Fantasy I. Guess I should have seen that coming. You guys did try to warn me. I mentioned many of the things I had problems with in this game. To me, it feels like they saw the success of Final Fantasy I and said, hey guys, let's take every single half-baked little wild idea we want to do and shove it into this one. Now let's take a step back for a moment and talk about the things I genuinely liked and were improved from the first game. There are a few. First things first, the character sprites and the details of the environments were just way nicer. Now, I know part of that, you know, remasters and whatever, but this remaster, I don't know if it was better or if it just had better source material, but the backgrounds and the sprites are way more detailed. And the little character sprites in the menu screen, rather than just being what they look like on the map, having like a portrait of them was awesome. I really loved that. And the random encounter and dungeon backgrounds were just more detailed, more interesting to look at. Good improvements. The dungeons, overall, were less grid-based, more detailed, and more fun to explore. My early notes had me writing leveling spells and MP increasing was nice, as well as like leveling up stuff as you use them. And finally, I quite liked the combat. Unfortunately, the more I played this game, I was forced to eat my words on all of those notes. Well, for the potential 1, 2, 3, and Yvonne, who like this game, now is the time to turn it off and just pretend it's great and I loved it and enjoyed it. Yay! Now, for everyone else, I'm going to talk about how terrible this game is. Let's start by talking about the caveats to the good. The graphics, I got no notes. They were just better. I loved the art. The music accompanying it, it was just worse than the first. The battle music droned and became irritating in a way I never felt with the first games, and the backing track for most towns, especially Altair, I was not a big fan of. It felt like a much shorter loop on the music, which just made it far less enjoyable to listen to. It definitely wasn't bad, just not on par with the first in my opinion. How's about those dungeons? Well, there was an absolute ton of completely useless trap rooms. Rooms I would enter, see no chest, and maybe get one encounter that was no harder than what was on the outside. I looked numerous times for a trap room to level grind, but never found one that was worth it. All the trap rooms I entered were just a higher encounter rate of the same thing I was fighting the whole time through the dungeon. There's no point in jumping into an encounter room and getting a chance at, like, a harder enemy to level grind on. No, it was just the same thing that I would hit when I fucking exited the room. What's the point? And that trend continued across all dungeons in the game. Except maybe the last two, but I have notes about that later. How's about those good notes I had? Well, the spell leveling was completely useless in my opinion. I tried numerous times to grind spells up to a high level, but no matter the time I spent, I could not make them useful enough to be worth it instead of just doing a normal weapon attack. The only spell that I continued to push to level up throughout the game was Cure. However, even at level 12 out of 16, it barely healed more than a high potion that I could buy for relatively cheap gil. This genuinely disappointed me, as I quite enjoyed having the heavy hitting spells of Final Fantasy I. And I know that there's the Ultima spell that does excessive damage based on your other spell levels, and the spell grinding to level those up takes so long, it's not worth doing. Especially when the hardest boss fight, the final boss fight, is, well, you'll see. And my note about leveling stuff up as I use them? At first it seemed cool. However, as I got more powerful, I realized I wasn't getting any level progress from random encounters. And after looking into it, my friends and I sort of Googling it, trying to figure out what's going on, what we came up with, which seems to be the truth, and someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, is that you have to hit a certain amount of attacks in a battle for you to level up that attack or that weapon. Which kind of makes a big chunk of the random encounters once you level up enough a complete waste of time and just slowing you down. However, once I discovered this, I did figure out how to grind my levels up a little better. So I would take 3 of my 4 party members, put them on defend, and have 1 party member continuously attack until the random encounters in the area were no longer leveling them up at all, and then I would switch to the next party member. I did this for probably about 3 hours when I was a third of the way through, and from then on, I never had to level grind again, because I kind of over-leveled a little bit too much, but also the leveling sort of levels off. It kind of doesn't give you much, again, because of the amount of attacks you have to hit for it to be worth anything, until you hit a boss, and then you'll just get like a full level up out of somebody that was barely even difficult. So, the leveling system, it sucks. And that note about liking combat? Well, as the game went on and spells became less and less useful despite trying to level them, I became honestly really bored of the combat. The level of repetition of enemies in the dungeons made things bland. Really, the only dungeon I liked was the tower, where you kind of like go up all these floors and it changes with a mini boss, I think every 4 floors or something like that, or every 2 floors. And they're kind of different themed, like one's ice and fire. That dungeon was honestly really good. Basically every other dungeon felt like I would just hit a square, get a random encounter, press square on my controller to auto-attack because there is nothing else I can do because my magic is useless. I may as well just hit them with stick. And that killed a lot of the fun of the random encounters that I enjoyed in the first game, was the occasional ones that were more difficult and how I could blast them all at once or something interesting, and now it just became bland, and not to mention almost all the bosses were relatively easy. Now I know I level grinded a fair amount and did over level a bit, but even then there was nothing that made it more interesting. No fancy mechanics, no special attacks, no high damage to my characters, nothing to make me stress, to make me worry. It was just press square and wait to win. And now I want to mention guest party members. Now I have been told this is going to be something that will repeat in later Final Fantasy games. I don't know which ones, I just know that guest party members is a thing again. And I despise it. I enjoyed, in the first game, taking 4 characters and leveling them up throughout, and really customizing the way my party was interacting with each other and with the enemies, and how each one was a heavier hitter in some way and another. Whereas in Final Fantasy II, with Magic not being very good, and the third party member of mine constantly switching, it meant I really just gave everyone dual weapons, and did the best I could with 3 useful members, and one that was consistently lower HP, lower damage, and much less armored, no matter what equipment I gave them. Additionally, the amount of backtracking in this game to the same locations was something I wasn't a big fan of. In the first game, it felt like I was sort of consistently moving through the world to the next interesting place, while occasionally coming back to the sort of main kingdom area every once in a while. However, in Final Fantasy II, I did a hell of a lot of back and forth on the top part of the map, just going to the same towns over and over. And most of this backtracking takes place before you get the boat as a permanent thing and the airship as a permanent thing. Having the chocobo was nice, and the little chocobo animations were adorable, but being only able to get the chocobo from one spot, not being able to cross rivers with it, and immediately losing it when you get off of it, just made it not feel like it was worth the time to go get it, and it only came in handy once. Overall, despite the map being larger, the first game felt more lived in, and I remember far more spots in the map than I did in the second game. And now, the number one issue I had with this game, in terms of its core mechanics, that I just thought was trash, was the keyword or password system in this game. Reading a box of text, having a highlighted word, then pressing learn on said word, then pressing ask to get one box of text that should have just come right after the text box when the word was highlighted. There's no reason to do this. There's no reason to add extra steps to learn a password. That feels like something they'd shove in a Telltale game. Why is it in Final Fantasy II? Who thought that was a good idea? Now, I like the concept of now these different words you can use that you've learned, you can use on different characters, potentially get different outcomes. However, 90% of the time you press one of the alternate options or all of the alternate options, and none of them mean anything, and you just get a question mark text box. Why would you give me this system and then not even let me use it interestingly? The only time it was any sort of difference to me was when I walked in the airship that was guarded, the fancy guarded evil airship. I went in and I was supposed to give a key item and be allowed in with the temporary ticket thing that we stole or whatever. Instead, I said the rebellion word, Wild Rose or whatever it is, and then I got in a fight, killed him, and got on the airship the same way. That was kind of fun. My friends were watching, knowing what I was supposed to do, and then how it worked out when I did the wrong thing. And I like that. But when did I ever have another opportunity for that? I tried multiple times. The only thing it would ever do is get you an immediate fight if you said the rebellion word to the wrong person. And that just made it feel bland and uninteresting and wasted time in dialogue. The dialogue is something I want to be interested in, read the story, not a mini game of having to select a highlighted word, ask, and learn. Why? I'm just glad, as far as I've been told, this never makes a return in another Final Fantasy game. Thank God for that. And now let's do a quick rapid fire of all the notes I wrote down that were negative without going in depth on any of the points and just reading them off. It would be really helpful to be able to go up to the ship and pay for it instead of going to the town, paying for it, and coming back to the airship. Bows really fucking suck in this game. I don't know where to go next. Runs into an OP enemy and dies. Well, I guess not there. Without auto battle, this would be hell. Why is my left hand on the right side of the screen and the right hand on the left side of the screen during the level up showing? The hit point scaling makes me think I'm farther along in the game than I actually am, which is a shame, because that means there's a lot more of this game left. Holy shit, Final Fantasy II just had an early version of Skyrim's leveling system. And finally, Confuse is dog shit. So, we talked about the bad, we talked about the little bit of good, and now I gotta mention the story, because this game actually kinda has one. Now, I'm a big fan of story in video games, and I quite like sort of picking it all up and listening and being enthralled and really just being interested by the story. So to gauge how much I liked this story. Rather than going and looking at a synopsis and then going by memory, I'm purely going to go by memory. And when I wrote this script, it was 1 week after beating the game. So let's see, what did I remember of this plot? The game starts, and there are 3 party members, with a token girl that has pink hair and has a brother who is mentioned but is not present. There's a war, and the monarchy has been overthrown by a bad guy emperor. Kind of like France without the guillotine. You're a group of basically kids who are gonna now save the monarchy. You get some twink sorcerer guy as the first guest party member. There's some stuff. You get a bald guy as a party member who fucking dies to an Indiana Jones trap. You get some useless prince, and he dies constantly because he's a weak loser-ass bitch. There's a big bad airship that carpet bombs the landscape, blows up some important towns. Oh no. Then some pirate lady offers you to take her ship, tries to betray and rob you, you kill her entire crew, she becomes your next party member, you know, normal things. But hey, you finally have a boat. She's honestly my favorite character. She's just, I love the dumb pirate speak. Next, the princess and her dad, I think, get kidnapped, and Firion tried to fuck a snake while Leela was watching. Had to be there. You rescue the princess and her dad from the big bad airship, then you blow it up with some thing you had to go find in a secret thing, and it's some fancy flame, and it blows up the airship, because somehow you need something special for that. Hindenburg would say otherwise. You get back the useless Prince Gordon, do something I forget, get back Leela, get swallowed by a monster, lose Leela, gain a dragoon from inside of the monster. At some point there was a wyvern who died and laid the egg, and you put it in a thing, and there's something with the wyverns and the dragoons. Don't know. You go up a tower, my favorite dungeon. You see the princess again. There are some characters who die. Minwoo, the twink, I think he does some sort of give up and does some magic and then dies. Don't know. You go find the emperor and Pink Girl's fucking brother, and he's now bad, and the emperor fucks off to hell, and then he decides to be a good guy again. There's a fake out ending before that, and then you go to a little dungeon, and then you go to hell and kill the emperor. And honestly, that's about all I remember of the story. Not incredible, but better than the first one by quite a bit, and I liked that. It's serviceable, but not super compelling. There are a lot of very simple beats. Bad guys go to good after one conversation. Random pirates become military leaders because some teenagers said she's chill. Overall, I think if the story was attached to a better game, it would be more enjoyable. But the character deaths had no build-up for me to care, and most of the story beats felt rather disjointed until the very end. And about that ending. Well, I mentioned there's a fake out, but then you go to quite possibly the coolest designed area in the game. Hell, or whatever they call it in the game. Now at this point, during the second last dungeon, I discovered I had missed one single bestiary entry and would not be able to get the plat. Now I figured it was going to be relatively easy for me to get the plat, as I just had to kind of go everywhere and grab everything. I had been very thorough about the chests, and up until this point had gotten basically every bestiary entry and every single chest, except I discovered there was one that was in a random part of the map that had a relatively high spawn rate that just for some reason I never saw. And it gets locked out after the cool tower dungeon thing, so I could not actually find that enemy to kill it to complete the bestiary in one playthrough, meaning I'd have to play the entire game again to complete the bestiary to get this trophy. And after not liking the game, but putting in the small amount of extra effort to get the plat, only to discover I could not get it, and would have to replay this entire game to make that extra effort worth it, I got pissed. I only had about 2.5 hours left of the game at this point when I discovered this. I was sick of it. I had been playing it for nearly 6 or 7 hours in one day, just trying to get it done. And now I realized I wasn't going to be able to get the plat, and all I was going to get was done. So I decided I'd do that as quick as possible. And then, while streaming this game to my friends in Discord, a friend of mine, Lucas, joined. Now, Lucas has actually platted this game himself already, and when he jumped in as I was going through the second last dungeon, after realizing I wasn't going to be able to get the plat and being quite annoyed, he said, "You have random encounters on still. Why?" And it was at this point I realized the Pixel remasters have the ability to turn off random encounters. Now let me be clear, I have no intention of doing this with any of the further Pixel games. I honestly really didn't want to do it in Final Fantasy II. However, with my frustration, being sick of the game, having played it for 6 or 7 hours, however many hours at that point of the day, I turned off random encounters, committed a horrible sin by doing so. I will 100% acknowledge that. I'm not proud of it. At which point, I blitzed through the second last dungeon, met back up with the brother guy, went to hell, and blitzed through that without hitting any random encounters. And, well, I'm not proud of it, and I would like to replay that final dungeon at some point with random encounters on, because it was pretty cool looking. I was sick of the game, and I wanted to kill that final boss. So how was that final boss? Well, I fucking two-shotted him with the blood sword. This final boss was crap. His attacks weren't much to write home about, barely dealing 500 damage to characters with 4,500 hit points, and the ability to re-heal on every turn over 500, not threatening. And the blood sword. Oh, the blood sword. The fact that the blood sword was basically just a fucking win button was kind of dumb. Now, for those uninitiated, you may not know what the blood sword is. Basically, it does damage based on the hit points of the enemy you're hitting, and it gives you the health that you do in damage. So for this 15,000 hit point boss, I did 9,999 damage with the first hit, and the remaining 3,400 or so that was left between the other attacks from my other party members. And it made this final boss not nearly as interesting, threatening, or enjoyable as the first games. The first games, I actually stressed I wasn't going to be able to beat it the first time. This time, the only thing I was stressed about is it was going to take more than 3 turns. Now, you may say, well, don't you like that kind of over-leveling, overpowered nonsense? And, well, why don't you play it without the blood sword? And to that I say, hey, fuck you, I told you I wanted this game done and I was pissed off. But also, I stand by the blood sword decision. In my opinion, if the game is going to give you something insanely broken, you kind of gotta take advantage and try it. But I don't think a game should ever give you something so broken that it two-shots the final boss without the act of getting said sword being its own difficult or challenging experience. So how do you get the blood sword then? Is it at the end of a long, intense dungeon? Something that's gonna make you fun? Something with a hard boss fight guarding the sword? No! That's stupid. It's nonchalantly handed to you out of a chest of some fuckwit who I told a password to after a dude fucking Yoda's in his bed and becomes a goddamn Force ghost. Completely disjointed and lame, removing any semblance of achievement for getting that insta-win button. Total crap. While I didn't like this game, I've certainly played worse. I think enjoyment-wise, I'd put it below Final Fantasy I. Can't wait to move on to a better game. And this is where I call to you. If this video gets any amount of views, hopefully there'll actually be a few people to put some input on this. Basically, I'm going to give a choice. Should I play Final Fantasy III next, or should I spin the wheel of spin-offs? Let me know in the comments, and that will be the next game I play and the next video you get to see. But until then, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching the first one and all those lovely, encouraging comments. I really appreciate y'all. Goodbye. And now, let's just do a quick rapid fire of the negative notes I wrote down without going into depth. God damn it.